listening to WPBM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 103.7 on your dial and globally at WPBMFM.org. Oh, folks, it's Wednesday at 10 o'clock, and you're listening to Queen Bee and the Honey Lovers. That can only mean one thing. It's time for Storyville. I'm Chuck Fink, your host, and today I have such a special guest to introduce to you, David Holt. David Holt has a bio that's going to take me about an hour and a half to read, but I'm going to close it up just a little bit. David is a four-time Grammy Award winner in music, storytelling, art, history, radio, and he's also a radio and TV host. For more than 40 years, David has collected and performed the songs and stories of the Blue Ridge Mountains. He's learned this treasure trove of music directly from musical greats like Doc Watson, Roy Acuff, Tommy Jarrell, Etta Baker, and Grandpa Jones, who I believe is on Hee Haw. We'll find that out a little later. But in addition to making numerous critically acclaimed recordings, David Holt is also host of popular television programs including the PBS series David Holt's State of Music, which is now in its 5th season. He also has series on PBS Folkways and the Great Scenic Railway Journeys. He's also featured in the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And David, I just so enjoyed you in that film. It was short, but I loved it. And you're also a host of the Nashville Network's Fire on the Mountain and the American Music Shop. Folks, in 2016, David Holt was inducted into the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. From 1998 to 2012, for 14 years, David performed alongside with Doc Watson. And to quote David, that experience was, quote, a highlight of my career. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me such pleasure to introduce to you my friend, David Holt. How are you doing, David?
Hey, Chuck, I'm doing great. How are you doing? Thanks for having me on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to have you here, believe me. Hey, you know what?
I should clear up all that long list of TV shows. The one that's on now is Great Scenic Railway Journeys. In fact, it's every Thursday night. And then David Holt's State of Music starts again in the spring. And we know we've got money for season 6, so it'll go a pretty long time.
Wow. You are, I'm sorry?
I said both are on PBS.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Well, you and I have some also common friends in the storytelling world. I'm just going to mention 2 of them. And they're 2 of my favorite people as well as storytellers, Michael Reno Harrell and Gwenda Ledbetter.
Oh, man, now you're going way back for me. Michael was the first person I met, Michael Reno Harrell, the first person I met when I came to Asheville, looking for old musicians. He was the first young guy I met that was the same age as me. So we've been friends all that time. That was 1969 when we met. And then Gwenda was doing a show on WLOS, the Mr. Bill show, and she had to put together a story every day. So, every Saturday. So she became known as the Story Lady, and what a story lady she was. But she got, after years of doing this, working up a new story every week, she asked me if I'd like to do it. And I said, well, yeah, I'm not used to that much telling stories, but I will try to figure it out, and I'll play music in between. And so that got me on television. That was a very good experience. And I'm a hats off to Gwenda for always encouraging me. We're still friends. We talk every few weeks, and, we go way back. She just turned 91. Mm-hmm. I turned 74.
Boy, this clock keeps on rolling, doesn't it? It's just unfair.
Can't stop it.
Well, Gwenda was
being present in the present moment. Man, that present moment's moving mighty fast, or hardly at all. I'm not sure which.
Yeah, I'm about to turn the calendar one more year come Sunday. But Gwenda, I have to say, was a guest on our show a few months back. And I just love her. She is a delightful lady. She is smart. Her stories are crisp. But the real special moment came when we were having a chat like we are now, and the phone rang. It was Gwenda's phone, and she answered it. It was her daughter reminding her to take her medication. So we kept having the show. So, David, you're living here in the mountains now. Where were you born and raised?
So I moved here in 73, but I was born in a little town called Gatesville, Texas. I was born there because I wanted to be close to my mother. That's a joke. Ring. No, it's just a little Texas town, and my uncles were the town doctors, and that became sort of how families will have sort of a spiritual home. All the grandmothers and grandparents are there and that kind of thing. So that's where I spent a lot of time and got used to some old Texas codgers that were, born in the 1800s and cowboy guys and stuff like that. So that kind of got me interested.
And where did you go from there?
So when Sputnik went up, my dad was an inventor and he wanted to move to California to make some of his inventions and start a company, which he did. And I was 10 years old and we moved to California at that time. So I became a surfer then instead of a Texas boy. And I became a musician. I started playing the drums when I was just a little bit older than that. And, I learned a lot in California. I went to college there, San Francisco State and Santa Barbara. And I moved to North Carolina, to Asheville, North Carolina in 1973, like I said, after just realizing there was a vast quantity of traditional musicians alive at that time in this area. There still are, but there were hundreds then. And many of them born in the 1800s. Now it's a big deal, or there's hardly anybody left born in the 1800s, but I got to know a lot of them.
Well, I remember a quote from Michael Reno Harrell, and I'm going to misquote it, so it's more of a paraphrase, but he said something to the effect that you have done more to spread the word of Appalachian music and storytelling than anyone he's ever met. And coming from Michael Reno Harrell, that is one heck of a tribute.
Well, I appreciate that from Michael, but I've been out there. I lived up in the outskirts of Asheville, up in the woods, and there was a kid that lived across the street, and he wanted to learn to play the guitar, but he didn't really care that much about learning from his grandfather who played. And then when he finally saw my show on television, and that came into his house like every day or every week, then he got interested in it. And I realized television is a very powerful thing for pushing culture along and preserving what we have. I really consciously thought about that more than concerts or anything else. The television really reaches in and stays for, they'll be playing these shows we're just talking about on PBS long after I'm gone.
Wow. So you've had all these television shows, and you've had years of being in front of the public, but there was 15 minutes of fame, I believe, from a movie from the Coen Brothers. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yeah, that was great. So
15 seconds of fame, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it wasn't 15 minutes, 15 seconds. So they asked me if I wanted to be in this movie that called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And I said, well, that sounds interesting. I knew that these guys expect you to, they tell you that they want you in a movie and you're expected to say, well, I'll quit everything I've got and come out there. And I said, well, I'm busy, but when do you need me? He said, I need you this week. I said, I'll be there. So flew out to LA and we did the shooting on the back lot of the Warner Brothers lot. And if you've ever seen Back to the Future, it's the same little town square that they decorated for that show. In fact, they use it in many, many movies. But my part was me and Ed Snodderly and I were leading about 150 people with torches down the road. And we were playing music. That was our part. And after the movie was over, I got a call from Joel Coen and he said, we were sitting here trying to think out what to call you guys. He said, I hope you don't mind. We billed you as the Village Idiots. Thank you.
And that brought you a lot of recognition, though, didn't it?
It did. But the really fun thing was getting to hang with Clooney and Holly Hunter and all those folks. John Goodman. We just sat around the trailers waiting for our shot to start, which was like 5 a.m. in the morning. So we had to stay up. And Clooney was entertaining. He's just like you think he would be. Just a wonderful guy.
Well, George Clooney actually is from a little town just about 20 miles from Cincinnati, which is my hometown in Kentucky. And his father was our newscaster in Cincinnati on a local TV show. And then he got a job in L.A., and that's where George went with him as a younger man, I guess more of a recent college graduate, but he went out with him, and that's where his career started. But from everything I understand, he is as down to earth and nice guy, funny guy. So you would
Funny
know.
guy. He entertained us the whole evening telling stories about. He had just finished ER. That was his big starring role, and he had done Batman. And he said they put him in a costume of completely made out of plastic, thick rubber, and he had to just pee, and he had to pee in the costume. He said so by the end of the day, it was like pee up past his knees. You know, and he said it really made it hard to do the lines and act in the movie.
That's amazing.
A life full of pee.
And now we know the real story behind George Clooney. We won't share that with anybody, George. And you also work with the Coen Brothers. What were they like?
They were fans of old time music, and so they knew me from that. And they were just really nicest guys you'd want to meet. I mean, they were just great and very down home.
You know, we need in entertainment, Hollywood, wherever, we need real people like that. It's wonderful that you were able to work with the Coen Brothers, George Clooney,
Yeah, I
Hollywood.
love it. Oh, you know, people are going to want to know, where are you in the movie, since we brought it up. I'm taking Babyface Nelson to the electric chair, and Ed Snodderly and I are playing fiddle and mandolin. I was actually hired to play the fiddle, but when they got out there, they looked at me and they said, "You look too normal. You play the mandolin. Let Ed play the fiddle."
And they still call you the Village Idiots, even though you look normal, huh?
Yeah, that's right. Well, we both look pretty idiotic.
That's funny. So you were saying you were from Texas. Did you have storytellers in your family from Texas?
I'm going to say yeah to that. No professional storytellers, because I don't think there was such a thing except for Mark Twain. But I had an old uncle, and my granddad used to love to tell cowboy stories. He had been a cowboy in the early 1900s. And we had one old guy, Uncle B. Wiley, and he had a trach hole right here because he had emphysema. And he continued to smoke non-filtered Camel cigarettes. He would just put it right through that trach. He could blow smoke rings out of his trach hole. And he talked like this. He had a little machine that he held up like this, and it was just his very monotonous thing. But he would tell us stories like, "You boys come over here and sit in front of me. I want to tell you something. I don't tell your Meemaw I told you this, but you boys are related to Frank and Jesse James. Yeah, Frank and Jesse James, the outlaw." And then he'd go on about Jesse James.
Are you really related to Jesse James?
Well, well, let's see, where do I jump in this story? So I was playing the TED conference, one of the big ones out in Monterey. And, you know, the people in the audience were like Mark Cuban and Bill Gates and people like that. And after the thing, I met a lady, Sergey Brin's wife, Anne, who was starting Google. Google was just starting then. And she said, I asked her what she was doing because her husband was starting Google. She said, "Oh, I'm starting a thing called 23andMe. And you can get your genomic testing and find out, you know, your family heritage." I said, "God, that sounds great." So I went back home and ordered it. I was one of the first people to do it, actually, and spit in that tube and send it off. And came back about a month later, and it said, "Famous people you're related to." And I clicked on that, and it said Frank and Jesse James at the top of the list. So that was, you know, my mother always said Uncle B was just all cattle, all hat, and no cattle. And, you know, bless his heart.
And could you define for our audience what bless their heart or bless his heart means from our neck of the woods?
That means you're fairly hopeless, but bless your heart anyway. You know.
Oh, David, I love how you embody the Appalachian culture by way of Texas and California, but you are as authentic here as anyone else. I love that.
Well, you know, I never wanted to be, even in the TV shows or anything, I never wanted to be a different personality. I didn't want to have to like be the funny guy all the time if people came up to talk to me, or the serious guy. So I just wanted to be myself, and that's what I've tried to do, and that's worked pretty well. Didn't get me famous, but I didn't care about that.
Well, I think you're doing pretty well. 4 Grammys.
Yeah, I could not ask for more. I feel like, you know, to meet the people that I met. Well, let's look at one of them. Let's just look at old Ray Hicks. I got some pictures that I took.
Oh, my
Ray
goodness.
Hicks. And you can see he's sitting on his front porch, and there's all this kindling wood, and Ray said, "If you chop your own wood, it warms you twice." And Ray talked in this really deep voice like this, and he talked way back down in his throat. I said, "Ray, what's that pentangle up there on the porch for?" He said, "That's to keep the witches away." I said, "Does it work?" He said, "Most of the time."
And please, for our audience, not everyone is familiar with Appalachian storytelling as you and I are. Tell the folks about Ray Hicks. He's a very, very special soul.
He really was. He was. Those of us at the beginning of the storytelling revival looked at him as our patriarch. Really, he didn't like to travel, so he didn't get out and perform much except at the National Storytelling Festival. And if you came to his house, he was what we call an all-day talker. But now he was the old-timey. He did everything in the old-timey way. And you'd come to his house, and he'd go. He wouldn't even say hi or shake hands or anything. He'd say, "And so," and then start into a story. Like the story had been going for 2 weeks, and you got in the middle of it, and it probably had been going for 2 weeks. And he'd say, "And so Jack looked up, and he looked in the woods, and there was a big old man coming through the woods. He had a big old head, and he was knocking against rocks and trees and sticks and leaves, and not even hurting a hair on his own head. Jack said, 'Hey there, who are you?' 'Hardy Hardhead is who I am.' 'Well, Hardy Hardhead you must be. Get into my ship.'" He'd go on like that for hours. I mean, hours. You couldn't get a word in edgewise, but it was interesting stuff, so you didn't want to. Finally, after about 6 hours, I just have to stand up and say, "Ray, gotta go." And so Jackie's wife said, "Son, we're gonna have to sell the cow your mama gave us." And I'm walking through the house, trying to get to the front door. He's following right behind me, telling the story. I finally get up to the car. He says, "Now, son, don't sell the cow for less than $50. Sticking head in my window. $50. I said, "Okay, Ray, I won't sell it for less than $50. And I just drive off, and he'd still be telling the story in the middle of the road.
Oh man,
he was such a character.
That's so sweet. So you mentioned the National Storytelling Festival, and if I'm not wrong, weren't you one of the first tellers of the early festivals?
Yeah, I think I was there in 75 or 76. It was the second or third one.
And what was that experience like?
Oh, it was great. I mean, it was very small, and I never, there was no such thing as professional storytellers at that time. A few people had been out on the road doing things like Gamble Rogers, Connie and Barbara, and these people were put on stage at Jonesboro, Tennessee, where the festival is, and the stage was just an old flatbed truck, the PA system, and there were probably 150 people there. And we thought, man, this is great. This is really successful. And now there's like 11,000 people there. That's how big it grew. It's a wonderful event, and I'm glad to have played it many, many, many times.
And for the folks listening, this is in Jonesboro, Tennessee, which is a very small little burg, and it has an interesting history. Tennessee was going to be named the state of Franklin in its origins, and the capital was to be Jonesboro, Tennessee. But as history played out, it's Tennessee, and Jonesboro's just a little piece of history of the state. Is that right?
That's right. And the interesting thing about Jonesboro, too, is it was an abolitionist town right there in the middle of Tennessee. It's a beautiful little place if anybody just wants to take a weekend ride and then come to the festival. It's incredible.
Yeah. It's a little town that comes to life in November, doesn't it?
Does it ever? Yeah.
So do you play music and you're a storyteller. Which do you think you lean more toward? Storytelling, music? How do you combine the two?
Music, definitely. Music is basically trying to play as good as I try to play. It's an Olympic sport, basically. You're like an athlete with your fingers and your voice and everything else. So it takes a lot of time, and it's a lot of fun. Learning is a lot of fun. But I love the stories to fill in between the songs and the music. And I noticed, when I was going to visit people in the mountains in this little community of Sodom Laurel, where I learned a lot of my music, that they would get together and they would pick. These were not these were back porch pickers. They were not really particularly good, but they were the real deal. You know, people just getting together and playing. And they would play for a while, maybe 3 or 4 songs. Then they'd stop and they'd say, "What about old John's girl? You hear about her?" And they would tell some story that was news of the day, or maybe something from an old ghost tale, something like that. And then get back into the music. And I realized that's the way it's supposed to be. That's how we're basically strung up. And the thing that works for us is hearing music and stories together.
So how
So I
many
consider
instruments?
myself first a musician, but certainly I'm doing a lot more storytelling these days too.
Well, David, including your voice, how many instruments do you play?
Oh, I don't know. The big one, a 10 maybe, but the big ones are the banjo, the finger picking guitar like Merle Travis style, and the slide guitar. Those things take hours every day, or at least half an hour every day.
But you
It's a
also
lot.
have some what I would call more primitive instruments that you play.
I love the primitive instruments because I found these old mountain folks really, really creative with the unusual instruments. But I should tell you before, what got me into that now were these. Talk about primitive instrument now. They're bones from a cow.
Bones.
And
Wow.
this is one of the things you asked me about storytellers. Yeah, there were storytellers in my family, but there was this weird tradition of playing bones in the family. Like here's a picture of my dad. We look a lot alike. You can see.
Wow.
There's Dad playing a pair of bones made by my great-great-grandfather during the Civil War.
Wow.
They're carved out of wood. And here's that man. His name was John Oscar Holt. And what a dude he is. Can you see that intensity of those eyes? Wow.
Yeah.
So, of course, he left North Carolina in 1858 and moved to Texas. He's the one that got the family to Texas. And he played bones. And so kind of every man in the family, and nowadays the young women too, play bones in the family. Let me show you what it sounds like. It's really made to play with music.
Okay.
Pardon me?
No, go.
Quite a bunch of noise, isn't it?
It's melodic noise. It's not just noise. It's very, very good.
Wonderfully rhythmic. So this got me, always attuned to the odd instrument from the time I was a little boy. My dad showed me how to play this and the spoons, but he wasn't a musician at all. He was, like I said, he was an inventor. But he knew enough that he had learned from his father, who had learned from his father, who had learned from his father.
The original educational system, if you will. So,
that's right.
So you, how do you mix your stories and music in a concert? And could you give us an example after you answer that question?
Sure. A lot of times it'll be just a flat out story that just starts and has an ending. And then a lot of other times it will be something that's going to lead into a song. And I can make that longer or shorter, just like we probably will at the end of this show, something, it just depends how much time we have. And so I'll just give you a short one, but I could make it half an hour if I needed to.
Do whatever you like.
No, I'm just going to make it short. So there I was standing backstage at the Grand Ole Opry, waiting to go on for the very first time. Man, I was so nervous. I had a new banjo made. I had a white suit, a white hat. I was ready to really, do a good job. And I wanted to follow whoever, I wanted to play something that followed whatever the person in front of me played. Well, little Jimmy Dickens came up and he sang, "May the bird of paradise fly up your nose." Billy Walker came out after him and sang, "It ain't love, but it ain't bad." And George Hamilton IV was after him, and I was after George Hamilton IV. And he sang an old novelty song called, "I'm so miserable with you gone, it's just like having you here."
So I got to tell you, I'm just having so much fun, David. This is great.
Me
Can
too.
you do mix your stories and music. You told us that. Can you give us an example of a story that you really love telling? And is it a folktale or is it a personal story?
Boy, there's so many. I think I should tell you a folktale because when the storytelling movement started back in the 70s, that was what we all told. Folk tales, or maybe Gamble told humorous stories, but folk tales were the heart of the thing. And now they hardly told at all, which I'm sorry to say because there's so many great ones. I think it'll come back. I think people get used to it again. Right now, it's gone more towards humor and personal stories, which is great too. But let me tell you a story. I went to Ireland looking for stories, well, to play gigs, but also looking for stories that never made it to America. Because, you know, most of our stories are from India, Africa, British Isles, at least the basis of the stories. And so I put together a book called Ready to Tell Tales. And this is a story from Liz Weir.
David, may I interrupt and ask you to hold the book up and tilt it down just a little so we can see it?
This is the book Bill Mooney and I put together called Ready to Tell Tales.
Okay.
And it has stories that are ready for retelling, like this one. And, you know, if you're a storyteller, you got to have ones that are all different lengths because you never know exactly how much time you've got. This one happened in County Mayo about 100 and something years ago. There was a young family, a young man and his wife who had very little money. So they had to live with his father and his mother. Now, like every family, they had seen sorrow. His mother had been blind for 10 years and would never see again. He and his wife had wanted a baby more than anything in the world, but they'd been married 6 years and had no child. But the young man was able to keep the family fed. That was the important thing. And Ireland in those days, everybody just ate potatoes and seaweed. Well, the potato famine came and wiped out the crop just within a matter of weeks. The young man knew he had to do something to save his family. They were starving. He knew if he crawled on the landlord's property and crawled over the fence and searched for food to eat, he would be hanged if he was caught. He had no choice. He was responsible. He took the only weapon he had was just a little hatchet. That's all. He didn't have a gun or a bow and arrow or anything like that. He went to the landlord's wall and he crawled over the wall and he walked the property all day long, avoiding people, but every once in a while being able to throw that hatchet at a rabbit or a squirrel, something like that, but he never hit anything. He was coming home completely depressed that evening when he looked up and he saw in the middle of a big, beautiful field with mist rising off of it, a big white stag deer. Well, he realized this might be a pet and he would be able to get close to it. So he snuck around the trees and the rocks until he got right next to the big stag. He raised the hatchet over his head and the deer simply looked up and said, "Don't." The man jumped back, not knowing what it was or if he was hallucinating or what. He raised the axe higher. The deer said, "Kill me and you'll have a meal or two. Take the one wish that I can grant you and you can have anything you desire. You can save your family." The young man didn't know what to do. He thought he was losing his mind. He stumbled back and he started running towards the wall. He got to the wall and he crawled over and he was running home. He saw his father along the road. He told his father what happened. His father said, "Son, this is what we've been waiting for. This is it. You must go back and wish for gold with that one wish." Well, the young man had to talk to his mother about the same thing. And he told her, and she said, "Oh, son, I haven't been able to see for 10 years. This might be my only opportunity to ever see again. You must go back and wish for my vision to be restored." His wife, who was in the next room, heard him talking to his mother. She pulled him aside. She said, Husband, we have no children. If we don't have a child, this family will disappear. You must go back and wish for a child." He tossed and turned all that night, just flipping around in bed and not sleeping a wink, not knowing what to do. So the next morning, he picked up the axe. He walked to the wall. He still hadn't decided. Climbed over the wall. He came to that meadow with the mist rising out of it. And sure enough, there was that big white stag in the middle of the meadow. The deer simply looked up and said, "Have you made your decision?" "Yes, I've decided to take the one wish." "Make the wish and it shall be granted." He said, I wish that my mother could see my wife rocking our new baby in a solid gold cradle. The wish was granted, and they lived happily ever
Oh, that's
after.
great.
Little story,
And that's an old Irish tale, huh?
an old Irish tale that I never heard it in America.
Ah,
Saw
oh.
it in any books.
Well, you tell that story so well. But David, I want to switch gears just a little bit because I have to do a station ID right now. I have to satisfy the FCC. So, folks, you're listening to WPVM LP in Asheville, North Carolina, 1037 on your dial, and globally at WPVMFM.org. Welcome back, David.
Good to be here, Bill.
So let's talk about these wonderful musicians that you learned Appalachian music at their footsteps. Let's see, Doc Watson. You played with him for 14 years. You
Boy,
must
that
have
was,
had a story or two with Doc.
yeah, that, here, let me get a picture here. I took a doc at home. Yeah, that was a highlight of my career, I say. There's a picture of Doc at home. Can you see that all right?
Oh, I see it perfectly. Yeah. Boy,
And
that picture captures his spirit, his soul, his everything about him. That picture really is wonderful.
yeah, he was blind, as you know, and so he really played everything with a lot of heart because he wasn't looking around to see what everybody else was thinking or doing or fidgeting or anything else. He got in there and he got inside each note really and played it. He was just a master at that.
And you played with him for 14 years.
On the road for 14 years. Now I was still doing solo shows at that time and shows with Josh Goforth, but we played about 4 dates a weekend for that long. It was great fun. He was getting kind of tired of traveling, which I understand now because I don't want to travel anymore. But he would go out to this California festival called the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass. And one time we were playing just the two of us on stage. And I looked up and it was in Golden Gate Park and there was people as far as to the horizon, which they said was between 250 and 500,000 people. I don't know what. And it was just Doc and me with a banjo and Doc with a guitar. It was like, that made me nervous. But it went well. Everybody loved it. And Doc pulled it off beautifully.
Oh.
He doesn't ever have to worry about, seeing people in the front row fidgeting or anything like that. So really get into it.
He was authentic Appalachia, wasn't he? And he just captured the spirit of this neck of the woods, but he brought that to the whole world. The whole world seems to know of Doc Watson.
It's true. Yeah, millions of people know Doc, and I think it's because he was so soulful. He was just soulful to his core, and good. I mean, he could play stuff. I mean, there are people now that can play faster and better and more notes. I'm not going to say better. I'm going to say faster and more notes. But if you listen to a Doc Watson solo, it's almost perfect. It's like, I don't think I'd add any more to that. I don't think I'd take away anything from that. Because it's like all of his solos, when he played a solo on the guitar, were telling a little story. They had some kind of sense that they made. And it connected to people the way music does in a way that you can't intellectualize. But he could do it.
Did he ever have murder ballads, which are kind of a unique to Appalachian kind of ballad?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And for the folks that are listening, can you explain what a murder ballad is?
Well, Chuck, it's a ballad where people get murdered.
And that's it, right?
Well, a lot of the old timers that I knew, particularly up in that little community of Sodom, where oddly enough, the ballads lived for generations from the old country to the modern day, actually. And I think in those old days when there was no radio, no media, that people just craved hearing stories about killings and crime. They do now, they did then. And these ballads were long. They'd have something like 20, 30 verses. So it really told a long story. And if we'd go up and try to get Deli Norton to, I wish I had her picture. Anyway, sing the ballads for us, and she'd do it in the house. But where she really used it was when she was gardening. So you had long rows of corn or whatever it was, and you had to hoe it. And so she would sing these ballads. It was a way to keep herself entertained. And they had 30 verses.
So it's kind of like Appalachian CSI.
Exactly. You want to hear a
I'd
story?
love to. I'd love to hear some of your music and stories combined.
Well, this isn't exactly that, but I was thinking of it on the way over here. Doc's father worked for the WPA, and in 1931 he was working and hurt his back. He was holding a big concrete pipe, and the guy on the other end dropped it, and it hurt Doc's father, whose name was General. He wasn't that was not a military title. That was his name, General Watson. And so General had to go home and couldn't work, and he couldn't even lie in the bed. His back was hurt so badly. He basically had a mat on the floor, a pallet on the floor. It was hard as a rock, and he could sleep on that. He couldn't sit up, he couldn't stand up, he couldn't sleep in the bed. This went on for months until it was time to harvest the crops. And of course, the people in Deep Gap got together and harvested the crops, and his dad gave him a cow so they'd have some milk in the family. And he made it through the winter, and then spring was coming. And General knew that he couldn't really rely on these people to bring in or put in his crops now. So he heard about a healing lady that was giving a revival down in Lincolnton, North Carolina. And he didn't have any money for the doctor, so he decided he would go down there and see her. And he wrote her a letter. And she said, well, come down between services and I'll talk to you. So he asked his neighbor, Mr. Mort, to borrow to drive his big old flatbed truck, and they put a springs and a pallet on top of the springs. And Doc and his dad rode all the way down to Lincoln. It's about a 4-hour ride. And they got there, and she was there waiting for him. And she said, now, who can I help? And the General said, well, why don't you start with my son? She said, what's his name? He said, it's Arthur. She said, Arthur, okay. Arthur, you come with me. What do you need? He said, ma'am, I want to be able to see. I've wanted to be able to see since I was a little boy. He was only 10 now. But she said, okay, let's go down to the prayer bush. They went to the edge of the field, and she said, now kneel down here, son. And she went out in the field and put her face in a bush. And she prayed for about 5 minutes. And she broke off a piece of the bush and came back and said to Arthur, she said, do you believe we can be healed by power of prayer? He said, yes, ma'am, I think so. She said, okay, I want you to close your eyes. I want you to close them tight. And I'm going to tap all around your eyes and on your eyes. So he closed his eyes, and she tapped all around his eyes and lightly on his eyelids. And then she said, now, Arthur, I want you to stand up, and I want you to see. He opened his eyes, and it was completely black. He just burst out crying. He'd wanted to see so badly. She said, now, son, you stop your crying. She said, all this means is that God had other plans for you, and he's going to need you someday to be blind. For some reason, we don't know what it is. She said, let's go help your father. So they got the father, General, out of the truck and went to the edge of the field. She said, now kneel down. He said, I can't kneel down. She said, Mr. Mort and Doc and I can help you. So they helped General down on his knees. She went out on the field. She prayed for a long time, that prayer bush. Then she broke off of a piece of the prayer bush and brought it. She said, do you believe you can be healed by the power of prayer? He said, yes, I think so. She said, I'm going to tap all the places that hurt on your back. And she did. She tapped all around his back. And then she said, now I want you to stand up and I want you to walk. He started to move. He lifted his left leg under his body and then his right leg, and he stood up and he walked towards the truck, wobbly at first, but he walked all the way around the truck a couple of times. And then he sat down. He hadn't been able to sit down for like 8 or 9 months. And he got out of the truck and he said, I think you healed me. She said, I think so too. And so they drove home. And Doc said they sang old Sunday school songs. His dad was the song leader for the kids. And he said they sang old Sunday school songs all the way home. They were so happy. I said, Doc, so did you mean you thought you weren't able to see because you wanted to bring this music to the world? And that's how you needed to be to present it to the world? He said, no, I think I was blinded because it would keep my ego in check. So, wow. And he said, more importantly, I think I would have been killed at Normandy like so many of my friends. We were sitting in this hotel room and I said, well, Doc, I'm just curious, what were some of the songs you guys sang going back home? He just picked up his guitar and started singing. Oh, the Baptists go by water, the Methodists go by land. If you want to get to heaven, I tell you, my friend, you got to go there hand in hand. As Jesus taught the people by the Sea of Galilee, said, I'm the door that leads to heaven. You must come in by me. The door so low you can't get under it. So high you can't climb over it. So wide you'll never get around it. You must come in at the door. You know,
I so enjoy this. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
A story like that, I don't really. I'm just picturing it in my head and just telling it. I don't really have it completely written down or planned out like that.
Those are the best stories. They're from the heart and from your soul.
Especially like that. Yeah. And the other part, the last part of that story, really that I should have mentioned, is that they got home, and Doc's dad slept in the bed that night. Got up the next morning, got on all of his clothes, hooked up the ox they had. They didn't have a horse or a mule. Hooked up the ox and plowed his field and was never bothered by his back again. Doc said, I witnessed a miracle. I've never witnessed one before or since, but I witnessed a miracle.
You are so fortunate to have spent time with all these wonderful artists.
I know. That was just, my life is kind of divided into, before I went to North Carolina, then all this really rich time learning the music and then being on the road playing it, which I loved. I loved all that at the time. And now it's the latter part of your life and just trying to hold it together.
Well, speaking of holding it together, I want to go back to there for in a little while about holding it together. But before we go there, you and Josh Goforth were doing like a 75-minute viral festival this year for the national festival. What was that like, working with Josh and doing it virally?
Virtually?
Virtually. I'm sorry.
I don't
I'm thinking, by the way, we're in the middle of the pandemic, so viruses everywhere.
That's right. Everything is viral. Well, I met Josh when he was 12 at his middle school. His teacher came up. I was doing a show for the middle school in Madison County. She said, there's a young man here who's quite a good guitar player, and he asked if he could play with you. I said, oh, great. 800, eighth graders, about the most difficult audience in the world. I said, well, if he's willing to try it, I'm willing to have him do it. So she brought up Josh, and he had his guitar, and he did a great job, just a great job. And so we didn't play together till about a couple more years. I had a gig to play the biggest the biggest country music festival in Europe. And I wanted to take a bunch of locals to play, like Laura Businger and Josh and my son Zeb, and David Coen was played the drums. So we went to Europe and had a really big time, and Josh and I just never stopped playing together. And I found out we had a band, David Holt and the Lightning Bolts, but it was so much easier just to play with Josh. We always have so much fun. We're laughing all the time and working up new material, and he's so talented and such a great guy. It's been like a super blessing to have a son, a musical son. I have a son who is very musical, and Josh fits right in our little family.
Oh, that's great. And how long have you been playing together with Josh?
20 years.
Wow.
I know, that's amazing, isn't it?
So that goes back to when he was in the 8th grade?
No, he started with me at 19.
19.
I mean, in terms of a band and all that, going to Europe and all that.
And so you guys are kind of connected at the hip now?
Absolutely. No, there's nobody I trust more or would rely on for judgment of something.
Oh, that's so wonderful. So I want to talk about. I'm about to actually, as of this recording, I've just turned 71, and you're just a couple years older. And this is the age of our lives where we start dealing with some physical changes.
Yeah.
And I know you have just been diagnosed a couple of years back with Parkinson's. How has
Right.
that affected you and your music and your storytelling?
Oh my gosh, how is it effective? It's like God must have a sense of humor, because one of the things that Parkinson's does is take away your sense of rhythm. I mean, you heard me play the paperback. I can do anything on my right hand side. On my left hand side is the shaking side. You know, it's not shaking very much right now, but it can get going, you know, about like that. But what was your question?
Well, Parkinson's gives us cause for adjustments. Or
Oh,
as we age, all kinds of ailments cause us to adjust. How are you able to adjust?
it's very, very difficult. You know, it all happened when the pandemic really started. That's where it really kicked into gear. I realized all my gigs for a year were canceled. So I realized this is it. This is sort of like, am I going to be in a year's time or 2 years' time? Am I going to still be able to do all this stuff? And the answer is no. So I pretty much had to say I retired from playing, you know, big musical concerts. I'll be doing some stuff. Hopefully, do the Solstice concert and some of those. But that concert you're talking about, the hour and 15-minute concert we did for the National Storytelling Festival, maybe our last one of our last ones. It's sad. It's just unbelievably sad to me. But you know, what do? You go on. You find another way. And so to find another way, I'm probably going to do more storytelling, think more about that, or maybe not even perform that much. I've done it so many years, 55 years. And, you know, that's a lot of motel rooms and a lot of eating out at restaurants, which yeah, I've had it with that. Being in airports, I've had it with that. And so I'm looking for ways to cope, really. You know, what instruments can I keep up and what will not. You know, Parkinson's affects your fine motor coordination. That's why you see a lot of Parkinson's people can't button their shirts, things like that. Well, think about playing music at a super high level. It's impossible. Uh, so one thing I did was start to play more harmonica, because it has nothing to do with dexterity except for your tongue and your mouth, and your mind. Uh, and it's good for your lungs. So I've been doing that. And, you know, I still continue to play stuff like this. Some of these mountain instruments I found. This is the mouth bow.
Cool.
It's got a little tuner on the top, and then it's just a flat piece of wood. Now this is also came from Morris Norton, the old guy who played the paper bag. He played the mouth bow. That's the first time I ever saw it. See if you can hear it.
Okay.
So this is the mouth bow. I'll start from there. So this is the mouth bow. It's got a tuner on one end. It's just a flat piece of wood. People usually use a cat gut for the string. This is a D string on a guitar, so no cats will harm making this instrument. And these old timers, the drovers, would drive cattle all the way down from this part of the world all the way to Charleston, and they drove wild turkeys to boot. Can you imagine driving 2,000 wild turkeys along the French Broad River and all the way to Charleston? Well, they did. Here's the song about it. Well, it takes 3 months on the drover's road to get these hogs to market. Oh, I'll come back with a wagon load and a few coins in my pocket. Oh, trading hogs for china dishes, coffee, guns, and salted fishes. I may never know what rich is. All I do is barter. Well, we turn our corn into sour mash, and sour mash to whiskey. It'll keep them warm on a winter's night and make their loving frisky. Trading hogs for china dishes, coffee, guns, and salted fishes. I may never know what rich is. All I do is barter. That's the mouth bow. Sorry you
That's the
couldn't hear
mouth
me
bow.
very
I got to tell you, the thing that stuck out from that entire song for me, sour mash. I'm thinking Jack Daniels.
well. Well, you know, people turned their corn into corn liquor, and that's how they made cash.
Yeah, yeah. It's part of our mountain heritage and our tradition here.
That's
Uh,
right.
in fact, there's it's a not important story, but there's still people that honor the moonshine heritage of North Carolina, and it's part of our culture here. So, and David Holt, you are so much. You are the ambassador for Appalachian culture because you bring it from here to the rest of the world. And I know you're talking about making adjustments, but it seems like through Zoom, at least you can still appear as a storyteller without having to travel. And I just wonder when all of this is over, yeah, there's going to be live festivals, but I wonder if there'll still be Zoom festivals so that we can hear you.
I was wondering the same thing. And I don't know. I feel like I've done what I needed to do, and I did it like 110%. And so maybe it's time to. Maybe this is time to pull back and regroup and uh, find a new way to use what I know. I don't know. It's just starting.
Well, you and I have a mutual friend. I won't go mention his name because I don't want to embarrass him. But this gentleman also has Parkinson's,
Yeah.
and he's had it for 18 years. And you two have the same spirit. And the spirit is, how do I say this? Almost an indomitable spirit of just moving forward, of saying, yeah, this is what's happening, but I still want to move ahead. And I think you and our friend are so inspirational, and not just because of the Parkinson's, it's because of your approach to life. And Parkinson's has just given you another tool to use in that approach to your life.
Yeah, you don't. You never know how bad it's going to get, and it is a degenerative, so it never gets better. That's hope is a very important thing. But you know what? I exercise like crazy. That's the main thing you can do, and that's been a joy to me to really learn to be disciplined about exercise.
Yeah, our mutual friend has taken up boxing, and it's helped him.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
done that too. That's one of the therapies. Yeah,
Oh,
great.
that's great. Well, have you tell us about any awards or recognition that you've received from your lifetime work in music and storytelling?
Let's see. I've got a lot. I guess one of the ones that means a lot to me was the North Carolina Musicians Hall of Fame. Being in there with so many great people, and they have a nice exhibit. They've done a beautiful job of having an exhibit for people, and I've given them some banjos and guitars and stuff like that. But the main awards that make a difference to me are the Grammys. It's so difficult to be nominated for a Grammy, but to win Grammys is like almost impossible. And now, for a person in the folk music category, it isn't pretty much impossible because you're going to be up against, they're going to put a banjo record by me against Bruce Springsteen or something like that. Mm-hmm. So it's impossible to win. So I'm really proud of winning those. The one with Doc called Legacy, a 3 CD set, won 2 Grammys for that, and 2 Grammys for Stella Luna, which is a storybook.
So you get the Grammy, you awarded the Grammys for both performing and producing?
Yeah, right.
All right. Well, David, this has been so much fun. I'm so happy that you were able to come here and that we were able to spend this hour together, because I have to say, this has just been a glorious hour for me, getting to hear you, getting to hear your stories, your music, and just to share you with our audience. So thank you so much for coming to Storyville.
My pleasure, Chuck. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate
All right.
it.
And folks, you've been listening to Storyville on WPVM FM 1037 on your dial and globally at WPVMFM.org. Say goodbye, David. Bye, y'all. Bye-bye.